The ground trembled long before you saw him, a low thunder that wasn't from the sky, but from the earth itself in the heart of the Great Plains. Where the wind tells stories older than memory, there lived a bison who had been condemned by fear. His name was Titan, and he was a creature of mythic proportions, a 2,000-pound behemoth of muscle and fury, a living relic of a wilder time. But to the people of Prairie Ridge, he was simply a monster, a shadow that had fallen over their peaceful lives. For months, Titan had been a force of pure destruction. Fences that had stood for generations were now splinters of wood. He had charged tractors with a suicidal fury that defied all animal instinct, and he had sent 2 experienced ranchers to the hospital with injuries that would forever remind them of his untamable rage. The community lived under a siege of their own making. Children were kept indoors, dogs were silenced, and the vast open spaces that once symbolized freedom now felt like a hunting ground. And Titan was the hunter. The town hall meeting was a somber affair, the air thick with fear and frustration. Sheriff Miller, a man whose face was a roadmap of long days and hard decisions, stood before his neighbors, his voice heavy with the weight of the verdict. "We've tried everything," he announced, his words echoing the grim reality. "Tranquilizers have failed. Professional wranglers from 3 states have given up. No sanctuary will take him. He's too aggressive, too unpredictable. The court has issued the order tomorrow at dawn. I have to put him down." A collective sigh of relief and sorrow swept through the room. They were a people who respected the land and its creatures, but Titan had pushed them past their limits. He was a broken animal, a danger that could no longer be tolerated. Sitting in the back of the hall, a small figure went unnoticed. 8-year-old Ilara had been blind since birth, but she saw the world with a clarity that baffled those around her. She experienced life not as a series of images, but as a symphony of sounds, vibrations, and the subtle energies that flowed between all living things. To Ilara, the town's fear was a deafening roar, a chaotic noise that drowned out everything else. But beneath that roar, she sensed something else, a single note of pure, unadulterated pain, a sorrow so deep it felt like a cavern in the earth. She had heard the stories of Titan's rage, but she didn't hear rage in the tremor of his distant roars. She heard a scream, a desperate plea for help that no one else could understand. Her grandfather, a retired farmer named Samuel, had brought her to the meeting, knowing she needed to understand the town's decision. He watched her small face, her head tilted as if listening to a conversation only she could perceive. "What is it, Starling?" he whispered, using his pet name for her. "You hear something, don't you?" Ilara turned her sightless eyes toward him, her expression one of profound sadness. "He's not angry, Grandpa," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He's terrified, and he's in so much pain. It's all he knows anymore." The next morning the air was cold, and still carrying the weight of what was to come. Sheriff Miller and his deputy loaded their rifles, their faces grim. A small crowd had gathered at a safe distance, their presence a silent vigil for the end of a tragic story. But Ilara had a different plan, guided by an instinct she couldn't explain, and a courage that came from a place of pure empathy. She slipped away from her grandfather's side while he was distracted by a neighbor. She knew where they kept Titan in a reinforced steel paddock at the edge of town, a cage built to contain a monster. She followed the vibrations in the ground, rhythmic thud of a massive heart beating in a frenzy of fear and despair. She walked not with hesitation, but with the unwavering purpose of a soul on a mission. When she reached the enclosure, the sight would have frozen the blood of any other person. Titan was a storm of fury contained, his massive head slammed against the steel bars with a force that shook the entire structure. His roars were not just sound, they were physical blows that hit you in the chest. But Ilara didn't flinch. She stood just beyond the fence, her head tilted, listening past the rage to the agony beneath. She could feel the frantic, chaotic energy pouring off him, a whirlwind of terror that had no outlet. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice a gentle breeze against his hurricane of fury. "I hear you. I know you're hurting." Titan stopped his assault on the bars, his massive head lifted, and he turned, his wild eyes toward the source of the sound for months. Every human voice had been a threat, a prelude to pain, but this was different. This was a note of calm in his symphony of suffering. He stared at the small girl, his nostrils flaring as he took in her scent. She was not a threat. She was something new, something he hadn't experienced since the pain began. Slowly, hesitantly, he took a step toward the fence, the ground vibrating with his cautious movement. Alara reached out her small hand, her fingers brushing against the cold steel. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said, her voice steady and calm. "I just want to understand." From the distance, her grandfather Samuel spotted her. His heart leaped into his throat, and he began to run, but then he stopped, frozen by what he was witnessing. Titan, the untamable monster, the condemned beast, had lowered his enormous head to the fence, allowing the small blind girl to touch his face through the bars. The furious Bison was standing perfectly still, as if in a trance, accepting the gentle caress of a child who saw not with her eyes but with her heart. If this incredible moment of connection has already captured your heart, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. The story of Alara and Titan is a testament to the power of empathy, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Do you believe that some souls can communicate beyond our normal senses, that a connection can be forged in the silent language of shared pain? Share your thoughts below. Samuel watched, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, as Alara's small hand rested on the Bison's massive head. The contrast was breathtaking, the fragile, pale fingers against the coarse, dark fur, the absolute stillness of the girl and the beast, a tableau of impossible peace. He saw Sheriff Miller approaching from the other side, his rifle still in hand, his face a mask of disbelief and confusion. The sheriff slowed his walk, his boots crunching softly on the gravel, each step a question he couldn't articulate. He had come to end a life, but he had walked into a miracle. "Alara, get away from there now." Samuel finally managed to call out, his voice tight with a fear that warred with the wonder of what he was seeing. But Alara didn't seem to hear him. She was in a world of her own, a silent communion with the creature before her. Her fingers moved, gently tracing the lines of Titan's face, as if reading a story written in his scars. "He's telling me what happened, Grandpa," Alara said, her voice clear and distant, as if she were translating from another language. "It was the storm, the big one with the lightning, that split the old oak tree." Sheriff Miller had reached them now. He stood a few feet away, his rifle held loosely at his side, his eyes wide with a professional skepticism that was rapidly crumbling. "What are you talking about, kid? There hasn't been a big storm in months." "Not here," Alara continued, her hand still resting on Titan's forehead. "Where he came from before they brought him to Prairie Ridge, he was struck by something, not the lightning itself, but something that fell from the sky." As she spoke, Titan let out a low rumble, a sound so different from his usual roars of rage. It was a sound of confirmation, a mournful note of memory. He leaned his massive weight gently against the fence, as if seeking more of her comforting touch. Alara's own face was a study in concentration, her brow furrowed, her sightless eyes seeing a past that no one else could. "It was metal," she whispered, "sharp and hot from the sky. It hit him on his head right here." She moved her fingers to a spot just behind Titan's horn, a place hidden beneath the thick matted fur. "It's still there. It's been poisoning him, making his mind crazy with pain. Every loud noise, every sudden movement, it's like a fire inside his skull. He's not mean. He's been screaming for help, and everyone answered with guns in cages." The sheriff lowered his rifle completely, his gaze fixed on the spot Alara was indicating. "That's impossible," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "We had Dr. Evans check him over twice. He would have found something." "You weren't listening," Alara said simply. "You were looking for a monster, so that's all you could see." The weight of her words hung in the air, a quiet indictment of their collective failure. They had judged a creature by its actions without ever truly seeking the cause of its suffering. They had condemned an animal for crying out in the only language it knew. "I need you to trust me," Alara said, her voice gaining a strength that defied her small stature. He'll let me help him, he knows. I understand. The request was insane to open the gate of a condemned and dangerous animal based on the word of an 8-year-old blind girl, but the evidence was right before their eyes. Titan remained completely docile under her touch, his massive body relaxed. His breathing slow, and even he was a different creature. The monster was gone, and in its place was a patient waiting for his healing to begin. Samuel looked at the sheriff, his face pleading. "Tom," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "look at them. What if she's right? What if we're about to kill an animal for being in agony?" The sheriff's decision would be the talk of Prairie Ridge for decades to come. He was a man of law, a man of procedure, but he was also a man of the plains, and he knew that sometimes the land held mysteries that couldn't be explained by rules and regulations. He looked at Alara's face, serene and confident. He looked at Titan's eyes, no longer wild with rage, but filled with a profound and weary trust, and he made a choice that went against every instinct of self-preservation and every line in his professional manual. He walked to the gate, unlocked the heavy bolt, and swung it open. The metallic groan echoed in the silent morning air, a sound of terrifying possibility. The path to Titan's fury or his salvation was now clear. Alara did not hesitate. She stepped through the gate into the enclosure with the 2,000-pound bison. The crowd of onlookers gasped, a collective intake of breath that was part terror, part awe. Titan lifted his head as she approached, his dark eyes following her every move. He took a step back, not in aggression, but in deference, giving her space. He was a king in his own kingdom, and he was allowing this small child into his court. Alara walked slowly to his side, her hand outstretched. "It's all right," she murmured. "I'm here to help you be peaceful again." She placed her hand back on his head, on the spot she had indicated before, the spot where the pain lived. "Show me," she whispered. "Show me how to make it stop." What happened next would be etched into the memory of everyone who witnessed it. Titan lowered his massive body to the ground, a slow, deliberate movement of immense trust. He lay his head on the dusty earth, exposing the area behind his horn, a silent invitation for her to proceed. He was surrendering his power, his defense, his very life into the hands of a blind girl who had offered him the one thing he had been denied: empathy. Sheriff Miller and Samuel approached cautiously, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. The sheriff had his radio in hand, ready to call for the vet, but he waited, watching as Alara gently parted the thick fur, her fingers probing with a delicate certainty. "It's here," she announced, her voice trembling with the gravity of her discovery. "I can feel it. It's small and sharp." She looked up in the direction of the sheriff, her voice pleading. "You have to get it out now. He can't take the pain much longer." The sheriff radioed Dr. Evans, his voice urgent and strained. "Sarah, get down to the paddock now and bring your full surgical kit. Forget everything I told you. This isn't an execution, it's a rescue." The vet's confused voice crackled back, but the sheriff cut her off. "Just get here now. You're not going to believe this." As they waited for the veterinarian, Alara did something even more remarkable. She lay down beside the massive bison, resting her head against his powerful neck. She began to hum a soft, tuneless melody, a simple song her mother used to sing to her when she was scared. The vibrations of her humming traveled through her body and into Titan's, a soothing balm against his years of agony. And for the first time in a very long time, the great bison closed his eyes and rested without fear, secure in the presence of the one person in the world who had bothered to listen to his silence. Dr. Evans arrived in a cloud of dust, her face a mixture of confusion and professional urgency. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the scene before her, a blind child cuddling with the most dangerous animal in the county. What in God's name is happening here? She breathed, her medical mind struggling to find a rational explanation. She found the problem. Sheriff Miller said, pointing to Alara and the docile bison. "She says there's something in his head." With Alara's guidance, Dr. Evans located the source of the problem. Her experienced fingers confirmed what the child had sensed: a hard foreign object lodged deep beneath the skin, just above the sensitive tissue near the animal's auditory canal. "I can't believe we missed this," Dr. Evans admitted, her voice a mixture of awe and professional chagrin. It's so deep and in such an unusual location. We were looking for a neurological disorder, a disease, not a battlefield injury. The procedure would be risky, even with the Bison's unprecedented cooperation. I'll need to sedate him, Dr. Evans said, preparing a syringe. Even a slight movement could cause permanent damage. Ilara shook her head, her hand never leaving Titan's neck. No, she said with that same unnerving certainty. He doesn't need drugs, he has me. He knows you're helping him, he'll stay still. Again the adults were faced with a choice between modern science and the inexplicable bond between a child and a beast. And again they chose to trust the miracle they were witnessing. As Dr. Evans made the incision, Titan flinched, his massive muscles tensing for a moment, but Ilara leaned closer, whispering in his ear, her gentle vibrations seeming to flow directly into him, a current of pure calm. The Bison relaxed once more, his trust in the child overriding his instinctual response to pain. The crowd watched in hushed silence. A community holding its collective breath. Farmers stood next to protesters, ranchers next to animal rights activists, their differences forgotten in the face of this extraordinary event. They were all just witnesses to a love so profound it defied explanation. After several tense minutes, Dr. Evans held up a small object in her forceps. It was a twisted, jagged piece of metal about 2 inches long, scorched and blackened. It looks like a fragment from an old satellite, she said, examining it closely. Something that broke up on re-entry and fell from the sky, a 1 in a billion shot. A 1 in a billion piece of metal that had created a monster out of a gentle giant, and a 1 in a billion child who was able to see the truth behind the rage as the source of his torment was removed. Titan's transformation was instantaneous. A visible wave of relief washed over him. His breathing deepened, the tension in his massive frame dissolved completely. He lifted his head and looked at Ilara, and in his eyes something new had appeared, gratitude, clear and profound. He let out soft rumble, the first peaceful sound he had made in years, and then he did something that brought tears to the eyes of every person watching. He gently nudged Ilara with his nose, a gesture of affection and thanks so tender it seemed impossible. From such a powerful creature, the little girl, who couldn't see, smiled, a brilliant, radiant smile that lit up the dusty paddock. He says thank you, she translated softly. He says he remembers how to be himself again. The story of Ilara and Titan became a new kind of legend in Prairie Ridge, a story not of fear but of faith. It was a story about the courage of a small blind girl who dared to listen when everyone else was shouting. It was a story about a community that learned to look past the surface of rage to find the source of pain, and it was the story of a great bison who was saved not by force but by the gentle touch of a friend who understood the silent language of the heart. Titan was moved not to a sanctuary but to Samuel's farm, where he and Ilara could be together. He became the gentle giant his original owners had described, the calm and peaceful presence that grazed contentedly in the open pasture. People would come from all over just to see them, the girl and the bison, a living testament to the power of empathy. Ilara would sit with him for hours, her head resting against his warm flank, telling him stories of her world of sound and touch, and he would listen, his massive head bowed in quiet companionship. He was her guardian, her friend, her secret keeper, and she was his savior, the one who had heard his silent scream and answered with love. Sheriff Miller often visited the farm, standing by the fence and watching them. That day, he once told Samuel, I came to do my job. I was ready to destroy something I didn't understand, but that little girl, she taught me that the bravest thing you can do isn't to pull a trigger. It's to open your heart to listen to the pain that's hidden behind the anger. The world often tells us to fear what is different, to condemn what we don't understand, but what if the most monstrous things are just unheard cries for help? What if the greatest strength isn't in our weapons or our cages, but in our willingness to connect, to see with our hearts instead of just our eyes? What do you think would have happened if Ilara hadn't been there? Do you believe true courage is facing down a monster, or having the compassion to see it's not a monster at all? The change In Prairie Ridge was palpable. It was as if Titan's healing had healed the town itself. The fear that had been a constant undercurrent was replaced by a sense of wonder and a renewed respect for the mysteries of the natural world the story drew. National attention journalists and animal behaviorists descended on the small town eager to understand the Prairie Ridge miracle. Dr. Arise Thorne, a renowned specialist in animal cognition from Stanford University, spent a week observing Alara. And Titan, his scientific mind, was initially skeptical, but what he witnessed forced him to reconsider the very foundations of his field. "We have protocols for everything," Dr. Thorne explained in an interview, his voice filled with a newfound humility. "We have theories about stimulus and response, about instinct and learned behavior, but we don't have a theory for empathy. We don't have a scientific model for a blind child feeling the pain of a tormented animal and healing it with nothing but compassion." Alara is showing us that there are forms of communication and intelligence in the animal kingdom that we are only just beginning to comprehend. The Alara method, as some started calling it, became a topic of discussion in veterinary schools and animal sanctuaries. Around the world, it wasn't a method that could be taught in a classroom. It was a philosophy, a way of seeing that required one to quiet their own assumptions and truly listen. Alara herself remained unchanged by the fame. She was still just a girl who loved her best friend. She found joy in the simple things, the feeling of the sun on her face, the rumble of Titan's happy breathing as he lay beside her, the texture of the wildflowers that grew in his pasture for her. The miracle wasn't what she did, it was that she was finally able to share the world. She had always known a world where emotions were tangible, where pain had a texture, and where love was a vibration that connected all living things. Samuel watched his granddaughter blossom. He had always known she was special, but now the world was seeing it too. He helped her establish a small foundation with the donations that poured in, a fund to help other misunderstood animals that had been labeled as aggressive or hopeless. "Every animal has a story," Alara would say during the occasional interviews she agreed to give. "We just have to be quiet enough to hear it." Titan's story had a ripple effect that spread far beyond Prairie Ridge. Other communities began re-examining cases of so-called problem animals, looking for underlying causes of pain or trauma instead of resorting to immediate destruction. It was a paradigm shift, a move away from control and toward connection. One of the most touching outcomes was the effect on the two ranchers who had been injured by Titan in his rage. Once they understood the source of his agony, their anger transformed into a profound sympathy. They both visited Titan at Samuel's farm, their initial fear replaced by a quiet respect for the animal's endurance to live with that kind of pain for so long. One of them said, his voice thick with emotion, "I can't imagine his strength. I don't blame him for his anger. I admire him for surviving it." The bond between Alara and Titan only deepened with time. He became her eyes in a way, showing her the world through his senses. He would guide her to the sweetest patches of clover, nudge her away from hidden holes in the ground, and stand as a steadfast mountain of warmth and protection. When the prairie winds grew cold, he seemed to understand her blindness, not as a lack, but as a different way of being, just as she had understood his rage not as malice, but as a different way of communicating pain. Their friendship became a powerful symbol for people with disabilities around the world. Alara received letters from children and adults who felt unseen or misunderstood, telling her that her story had given them hope, that their unique ways of experiencing the world were not weaknesses, but strengths. Years passed. Alara grew from a girl into a young woman, her quiet confidence and profound empathy shaping her into a leader. She was pursuing a degree in animal science, hoping to blend her intuitive understanding with scientific knowledge to revolutionize how humans interact with the animal kingdom. Titan grew old, his massive frame still powerful, but his movements slower. His eyes held the wisdom of a creature who had known both the deepest agony and the most profound love. He remained by Alara's side, her oldest and dearest friend, a constant reminder of the day A silent scream was answered by a loving heart one cool autumn evening as the sun set over the plains painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Ilara sat with Titan in his favorite spot on a hill overlooking the prairie. She was reading a textbook with her fingertips, her braille reader humming softly beside her. Titan lay peacefully, his head in her lap. "You know," she said softly, stroking his weathered face, "Dr. Thorne wrote another paper about you. He calls you a keystone personality, an individual who fundamentally changes the ecosystem of understanding around them." Titan rumbled contentedly, a sound that had become the background music to her life. "He's right," she continued. "You didn't just change this town, Titan, you changed me. You taught me that my blindness wasn't a wall, it was a doorway. It allowed me to see what really matters, not the surface of things, but the truth that lies beneath." Their story had become more than just a local legend. It was a modern fable, a reminder that in a world filled with noise and judgment, the most powerful thing we can do is be still, be present, and listen with all of our being. It reminds us that heroes don't always carry swords. Sometimes they carry a quiet understanding, and that monsters are often just victims whose stories haven't been heard. The legacy of the blind girl and the furious Bison wasn't just in the changed lives of a single town or the rescued animals of a small foundation. It was in the fundamental question they posed to the world, a question that continues to echo across the plains. What other miracles are waiting to happen if we just have the courage to close our eyes and truly see? The prairie wind carried more than just the scent of rain and earth. It carried whispers of their story, the tale of the girl who saw with her heart and the beast who was healed by her touch. The Prairie Ridge miracle was no longer a headline. It had become a quiet, persistent force for change, a seed of empathy planted in the hard soil of a skeptical world. Dr. Aris Thorne's paper on Titan as a keystone personality had sent shockwaves through the scientific community. He argued that certain individuals, human or animal, possess a unique ability to unlock empathy in those around them, fundamentally altering the social and emotional landscape. Their very existence, he proposed, becomes a catalyst for profound systemic change. The Ilara Foundation, once a small fund run from Samuel's kitchen table, was now a significant organization with a small but dedicated staff. They operated out of a newly constructed barn on the farm, a building designed with wide, accessible ramps and sensory gardens, a place built on the principle of inclusive, gentle healing. Ilara, now 19, balanced her university studies with her work at the foundation. Her life was a whirlwind of academic rigor and profound emotional labor. She would spend her mornings dissecting cellular structures under a microscope, and her afternoons using her hands to map the invisible wounds of a traumatized horse. Her gift had not diminished with age, it had refined, grown more nuanced. She could now sense not just pain, but the complex tapestry of fear, memory, and grief that wove it into an animal's being. Her fame was a double-edged sword. It brought resources and awareness, but it also brought a crushing weight of expectation. People began to see her as a saint, a miracle worker, which made her deeply uncomfortable. "I'm not magic," she often explained to visitors, her voice calm but firm. "I just listen when you're quiet, really quiet. You can hear what the world is trying to tell you." Titan is the one who taught me how to do that. Titan, in his majestic old age, had fully embraced his role as co-founder and chief therapist of the foundation. His presence was a grounding force. New animals brought to the sanctuary, often frantic with fear, would grow calm in his presence. He would stand near their enclosures, a silent, powerful mountain of peace, and his stillness would communicate something that no human could. "You are safe here, you can lay down your armor." One of their most challenging cases was a mare named Whisper, a beautiful thoroughbred, who had been rescued from an illegal racing ring. She had been so abused, so terrorized, that she wouldn't let any human near her. She lived in a state of perpetual flight, her body a taut wire of fear for weeks. The team had tried everything: gentle approaches, calming scents, patience, but Whisper remained locked in her trauma. Ilara knew that this was a wound that needed more than just a human touch. It needed a peer. A fellow survivor Titan, Ilara said one afternoon. Standing by Whisper's paddock with the old bison, she needs to hear your story. What happened next became another chapter in their legend. Ilara led Titan to the fence, separating the two pastures. Titan stood there, his gaze fixed on the frantic mare. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. He simply was present then. He did something he had never done before. He let out a low, mournful call. It was the sound Ilara had heard all those years ago, the sound of his own agony. The scream he had held inside for so long. It was a sound of shared trauma, a single note that said, "I know your pain, I have lived it too." Whisper stopped her frantic pacing. She turned her head, her ears swiveling toward the old bison. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time since her arrival, she stood still. Titan called out again, and this time, the note was different. It was softer, a rumble of endurance, of survival. It said, "But the pain does not have to be the end of the story." Slowly, cautiously, Whisper walked toward the fence. She and Titan stood on opposite sides, their breaths mingling in the cool air. They were two survivors, two souls who had been to the darkest places, and they were recognizing each other in that shared darkness. From that day on, Whisper's healing began. She started allowing Ilara to touch her, then to brush her, and eventually to ride her. She had needed to know that she wasn't alone in her suffering, that another creature understood the language of her scars. The story of Whisper and Titan deepened the foundations. It wasn't just about human-animal connection. It was about facilitating animal-to-animal healing, creating a community of survivors who could guide each other home. The Foundation's work attracted a troubled teenager from the city named Jake. He had been sent to Prairie Ridge as part of a juvenile diversion program, a last chance to avoid a sentence in a detention center. Jake was a storm of anger and resentment, his own life a tapestry of neglect and violence. He arrived with a cynical sneer, convinced this was just another pointless exercise in feeling good. He was assigned to mucking out stalls, a menial task he performed with sullen defiance. He scoffed at the stories of Ilara and Titan, dismissing them as sentimental nonsense. One afternoon, Jake was cleaning the stall next to a rescued wolf dog named Shadow, a creature as wary and untrusting as Jake himself. Jake, frustrated with a stubborn pitchfork, kicked the side of the stall with a loud bang. Shadow, triggered by the sudden noise, lunged at the bars, snarling, his eyes yellow with fear and aggression. Jake stumbled back, his own fear momentarily eclipsing his anger. Ilara appeared at his side, her presence a sudden calm in the chaos. She didn't speak to Jake. She spoke to the wolf dog, her hands signing gently in the air as she hummed her low vibrational tune. Shadow's snarling subsided, replaced by a low whine. He backed away from the bars, his body still trembling, but his aggression gone. Jake stared, speechless. He had seen Ilara from a distance, but had never witnessed her gift up close. "How did you do that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "He wasn't angry at you," Ilara said, turning her sightless eyes toward Jake. "He was scared." The noise reminded him of a time when someone hurt him. Anger is just fear's bodyguard. It's the armor we wear to protect the wounded parts of ourselves. Her words hit Jake with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just talking about the wolf dog. She was talking about him for the first time in years. Jake felt a crack in his own armor. That day was the beginning of Jake's transformation. He started watching Ilara, learning from her quiet patience. He saw how she approached every animal, not with an agenda, but with an open heart ready to receive their story. He started to try it himself. Tentatively at first, he would sit by Shadow's enclosure, not saying a word, just being present, just listening slowly, painstakingly. The boy and the wolf dog began to heal each other. They were both survivors of a different kind of wilderness, and in the quiet sanctuary of the Foundation, they found a shared language of healing. Jake became one of the Foundation's greatest success stories. He eventually became the head animal caretaker, his once angry hands now gentle, and sure. He had a unique gift for working with the most aggressive and fearful animals because he understood their armor. He knew it was just a cover for the same pain he had once carried. Ilara didn't just save these animals. Jake would later tell a visiting documentary crew, "She saves people too," she teaches you how to find the quiet place inside yourself, and once you find that, you can hear everything. The Foundation's growing influence was not without its challenges. A multinational biotech corporation named Genadin learned of Titan's unique history and resilience. They saw not a sentient being, but a genetic goldmine, a set of genes that could be patented and sold for millions. They approached the Foundation with a lucrative offer to purchase Titan's genetic material for research purposes. They promised state-of-the-art facilities, a generous endowment, everything that would secure the Foundation's future. But Ilara's answer was swift and unequivocal. Titan is not a commodity. She stated in a press release that was quoted around the world, "His value is not in his DNA, it is in his story, his spirit, and his friendship. He is a teacher, not a test subject. He belongs to the earth, not to a corporation." Genadine, unaccustomed to being told no, launched a public relations campaign to discredit Ilara and the Foundation they funded. Rival scientists to publish papers dismissing the Ilara method as unscientific. Emotionalism, they portrayed her as a naive girl standing in the way of progress that could help millions of animals. The ensuing legal and media battle was the greatest test the Foundation had ever faced. It was a classic David and Goliath struggle, a small, empathy-driven sanctuary against a soulless corporate giant. The pressure on Ilara was immense. She was hounded by journalists, her every move scrutinized. She received threats from anonymous sources, but she never wavered. Her resolve was as unshakable as the prairie bedrock. "They want to own the code for resilience," she told her grandfather Samuel one evening as they sat on the porch watching Titan graze peacefully. "But resilience isn't something you can bottle. It's something you earn through suffering and connection. You can't patent love." The community of Prairie Ridge rallied around her. Farmers, ranchers, the very people who had once condemned Titan, now stood as his fiercest protectors. They organized fundraisers, wrote letters to editors, and created a human shield around the farm. Whenever Genadin's representatives came near, the standoff culminated in a tense town hall meeting, just like the one all those years ago. But this time, the mood wasn't fear, it was defiance. The CEO of Genadine, a slick man in expensive suit, presented a polished slideshow full of promises and projections. Then Ilara spoke. She didn't use a slideshow, she just told a story. Years ago, she began, her voice filling the silent room. "This town decided to kill a monster because you were afraid. Today, a different kind of monster has come to our town. It wears a suit and speaks of profit, but it is driven by the same fear, the fear that some things, the most important things, cannot be owned or controlled." Titan taught us that true value isn't something you can quantify. He taught us that healing comes from connection, not from exploitation. We will not sell his body, we will not sell his spirit, and we will not sell the soul of this community. Her speech was met with a thunderous standing ovation. The CEO of Genadine, seeing the united front against him, quietly packed up his presentation and left town. It was a victory, not just for the Foundation, but for the principle that some things are not for sale. The incident, however, took its toll. The stress of the battle had been immense, and it had forced Ilara to confront the public side of her life in a way she never had before. She retreated into herself for a time, spending long hours alone with Titan, drawing strength from his quiet, unwavering presence. He seemed to understand the weight of her burden, often nudging her gently with his massive head as if to say, "I am here, we have weathered worse storms than this." It was during this period of introspection that Ilara made a new discovery about her gift. She had always focused on receiving information from the animals, on hearing their stories, but she realized now that it was a two-way street. She could also project feelings of calm, of safety, of love. She began experimenting, using her focused intention to create an aura of tranquility around the most traumatized animals. Her success was remarkable. She found she could soothe a panicked herd of cattle from 100 yards away, or calm a terrified dog. Just by being in the same room, her gift was evolving from passive listening to active healing. This new ability was put to the ultimate test when a massive tornado, a true monster of the sky, ripped through the prairie. The warning sirens gave them less than 20 minutes to prepare. The sky turned a sickening shade of green, and the wind began to howl with a demonic fury. Jake and the staff worked frantically to secure the animals in the reinforced storm shelter, but the panic was overwhelming. The animals, sensing the violent shift in atmospheric pressure, were frantic. Alara knew they didn't have time to move them all individually. Everyone get to the shelter, she commanded, her voice cutting through the rising wind. I'll handle the animals. Ignoring Jake's protests, she walked out into the open pasture. Positioning herself in the center of the sanctuary, she closed her eyes, planted her feet firmly on the trembling ground, and reached out with her mind. She didn't focus on individual animals. Instead, she focused on a single feeling, the feeling of Titan's peaceful presence. Beside her, she recalled the feeling of his warm breath, the steady rhythm of his heart, the unshakable certainty of his friendship. She took that feeling, that perfect sphere of calm, and she expanded it, pushing it out like a ripple in a pond, a silent symphony of peace against the orchestra of the storm. The animals felt it instantly. The frantic horses stopped their panic, circling the sheep huddled together, their trembling subsiding. The birds in the trees fell silent from the storm shelter. Jake and the others watched in awe as a bubble of impossible calm seemed to form around Alara. The wind howled around the edges of the sanctuary, but within that circle, the animals stood quietly, their eyes fixed on the small figure at the center. The tornado touched down less than a mile away, its destructive funnel carving a scar across the landscape, but it passed by the foundation, leaving it miraculously untouched. When the storm had passed, Alara collapsed, drained but triumphant. She had held back the chaos with the sheer force of her will, powered by a love that had been forged in a crucible of shared pain. Titan was the first to her side, nudging her with his nose. His low rumble, a song of praise and concern. That single act cemented her legend. It was no longer a story of a girl who could talk to animals. It was the story of a woman who could command the very essence of peace. Years later, Alara, now Dr. Alara Whitmore, stood before a graduating class at the university she had once attended. Her work had revolutionized veterinary science, integrating emotional and psychological wellness into the core of animal medicine. Her textbooks were standard issue, and the Alara method was a required course for any aspiring vet. Titan was gone. Now he had passed away peacefully in his sleep a few years prior. His great heart finally still. He was buried on the hill overlooking the sanctuary, his grave marked by a single unadorned stone, a silent testament to a life that had changed the world. But his spirit remained. It was in the whisper of the prairie grass, in the quiet courage of the rescued animals, and in the heart of the woman he had saved. We are taught to believe that our senses define our reality, Alara told the graduates, her voice resonating with the quiet wisdom of a life fully lived. But the most profound truths are not seen or heard. They are felt. They are the connections that bind us, the silent stories we share, the empathy that bridges the gap between two lonely souls. I once knew a bison who was condemned as a monster. He was in agonizing pain, and his rage was the only language he had to express it. Everyone saw a beast to be destroyed. I only saw a friend who needed help. My blindness, which the world saw as a weakness, became my greatest strength. It forced me to listen with more than just my ears. It forced me to see with more than just my eyes. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the sea of young, hopeful faces. Your greatest challenge will not be to diagnose a disease or to set a broken bone. It will be to listen to the silent screams of the world. It will be to see the story behind the symptoms, the pain behind the rage. It will be to find the courage to open your heart to a reality that is felt, not just observed. Because in that silent space, in that shared vulnerability, you will not just find the cure for your patients. You will find the cure for yourselves. You will find what it truly means to be a healer. As she finished her speech, the auditorium was completely silent. Then, a single person began to clap, and soon, the entire hall erupted in a wave of thunderous applause. It was a sound of hope, of inspiration, of a new generation ready to embrace a more compassionate world, and somewhere, on a windswept hill in Prairie Ridge, the spirit of a great Bison rumbled in contentment, his story now a timeless echo in the heart of humanity, a permanent reminder that love is the one language that all of creation understands. The legacy of the foundation continued to grow, expanding its reach and refining its methods. Jake, now a man in his late 20s with a quiet confidence that belied his troubled youth, managed the day-to-day operations with an intuitive grace that reminded everyone of a young Alara. He had married a local woman, and they were expecting their first child, a new generation to be raised within the sanctuary's aura of peace. The Alara method had inspired a new field of therapy known as interspecies empathic resonance, and research centers dedicated to it were being established at universities. Worldwide scientists were finally developing the tools to measure the subtle bio-vibrational frequencies that Alara had always sensed, proving that her gift was a gift. Natural though rare, human ability. Alara, while celebrated, chose a quieter life. She preferred the hands-on work at the foundation to the international speaking circuit. She found her deepest satisfaction in the small moments of connection. The first time a traumatized dog wagged its tail, the moment a fearful cat finally purred in her lap, the deep, trusting sigh of a rescued farm animal feeling safe for the first time. These were the miracles that fueled her soul. One crisp autumn afternoon, a new arrival came to the foundation. It was a young golden eagle, found by the side of a highway, his wings shattered by a collision with a truck. He was a wild, proud creature, and his cage was a prison of rage and terror. He slammed himself against the bars, his fierce eyes burning with a hatred for all things human. He refused food, and the veterinarians feared he would die from stress alone. His spirit is as broken as his wing, Jake told Alara, his face etched with concern. He won't let us near him. We can't set the bone if we can't sedate him, and we can't get close enough to do that. Alara stood before the eagle's cage for a long time. She didn't try to hum or project calm. This was a different kind of pain. It wasn't the agony of a physical wound like Titan's, or the terror of abuse like Whispers. It was the fury of a wild spirit caged, the grief of a king who had lost his sky. She understood that her usual methods wouldn't work. She couldn't offer him the comfort of a fellow survivor from the ground. She had to meet him in his own element. So she did something she hadn't done since she was a child. She remembered her connection with Titan. Not his pain, but his strength, his unshakable sense of self, his deep connection to the earth. She closed her eyes and reached for that feeling. But then she transformed it. She let it soar. She imagined the feeling of the wind beneath her wings, the vast, limitless expanse of the blue sky. She imagined the world not as a series of earthbound obstacles, but as a map of air currents and possibilities. She projected not calm, but freedom. The eagle stopped his frantic movements. He tilted his head, his sharp eyes fixing on her with a new intensity. He was hearing a language he understood, a song of the sky. Alara didn't move or speak. She simply stood there, her spirit soaring with his, a silent promise that he was not forgotten, that his wildness was still seen and honored. Slowly, the eagle lowered his head. The fire in his eyes softened to a smoldering ember. He was still proud, still wild, but he was listening. Jake seized the moment and, moving with practiced slowness, managed to administer the sedative. The eagle's wind was set, and his long road to recovery began. It was a new evolution in Alara's gift, an understanding that healing wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach. It required the healer to step into the world of the one who was hurting, to speak their unique language, whether it was the earthy rumble of a bison or the silent song of the sky. The foundation built a massive flight aviary for the eagle, the largest in the state, giving him space to strengthen his wing. Jake worked with him every day, and a bond of mutual respect formed between the boy from the streets and the king of the skies. The day the eagle was ready for release, The entire community gathered. They watched as Alara and Jake opened the aviary door. The eagle hopped out, looked around, and then, with a powerful beat of his mended wings, he launched himself into the air. He circled the sanctuary once, twice. A majestic silhouette against the setting sun. Then he let out a single, piercing cry, a sound not of pain or anger, but of pure, unadulterated joy, a thank you to the earthbound creatures who had understood his need for the sky. As they watched him disappear into the horizon, Alara felt a familiar, gentle presence beside her. She couldn't see him, but she could feel the warm, rumbling spirit of Titan, her friend, her teacher, her keystone. He was gone from the earth, but his legacy was in the soaring eagle, in the healed mare, in the redeemed boy, and in the heart of the woman who had taught the world to see with its heart. His love had become a permanent part of the landscape, an eternal echo on the prairie wind, a testament to the fact that the most powerful force in the universe is a connection born of empathy, a love that has the courage to listen to the silence. The cry of the eagle was a beginning, not an end. It marked a new chapter for the Alara Foundation, a shift from healing individual wounds to nurturing the very fabric of wildness itself. The sanctuary expanded its mission, becoming a place not just of recovery, but of rewilding, a place where animals could remember not just how to survive, but how to be their truest selves. One of their most ambitious projects involved a pack of gray wolves rescued from a bankrupt roadside zoo in Wisconsin. These wolves had been born in captivity. They had never known a true pack structure, never hunted, never felt the wild earth beneath their paws. Without a territorial boundary, they were a chaotic mess of anxiety and misplaced aggression. A broken family lashing out at each other because they didn't know the ancient social laws of their own kind. The experts said it was hopeless, that they were too domesticated, too damaged to ever form a functional pack. You can't teach wildness, one biologist told Alara over a video call. It's an instinct passed down through generations. Their software is corrupted. Alara respectfully disagreed. We don't have to teach them, she countered. We just have to create the conditions for them to remember. It's not their software that's corrupted, it's their environment. The Foundation acquired a vast 1,000-acre parcel of rugged woodland in the Montana foothills, a remote, secure territory where the wolves could be released and monitored from a distance. But before the release, Alara knew a crucial step was needed. They needed a teacher, a wolf who remembered the old ways. They found him in a remote Siberian sanctuary, a magnificent old alpha named Boris, whose pack had been lost to poachers. He was old, scarred, and carried a profound loneliness that Alara could feel even through a grainy video feed. Transporting him was a logistical nightmare, a diplomatic and financial marathon, but the Foundation, with its global network of supporters, made it happen. When Boris arrived, he was not introduced to the captive bred pack directly. Instead, he was released into the massive new territory. First for weeks, he roamed 1,000 acres alone, marking his territory, re-establishing the scent lines and ancient boundaries of his kind. He was singing the pack's story back into the land itself. Then, the Wisconsin wolves released into the territory. The younger wolves, frantic and disoriented, ran wild at first, but then they began to encounter Boris's scent markers, the scent of a confident, established alpha. It was a language they understood on a genetic level, a call to order from a forgotten part of their souls. One by one, they were drawn to him. Boris did not force his leadership, he simply embodied it. He taught them through action how to hunt as a team, how to communicate with subtle shifts in body language, how to care for the weaker members of the pack. He was reteaching them the sacred social contract of the wolf. It was a process that took months, documented by dozens of remote cameras and non-invasive drones. Dr. Thorne and his team studied the footage with religious fervor. They were witnessing the re-emergence of an entire culture from the brink of extinction. Alara has done it again, Dr. Thorne remarked to a colleague. She's moved beyond healing individuals, she's healing entire social systems. She's not a therapist, she's a cultural restorationist. Back in Prairie Ridge, Jake faced his own leadership test, a flash flood. the result of a once-in-a-century storm, had breached the banks of the nearby river, threatening to inundate the lower pastures of the foundation, where many of the older, less mobile animals resided. The evacuation protocols were designed for fire or tornado, not a relentless rising tide. There was panic, both animal and human, but Jake, channeling the calm certainty he had learned from Alara, became the anchor. In the storm he remembered Titan's strategic mind, how the Bison had used the terrain to his advantage. Jake organized the staff and volunteers, using the natural rises in the land to create safe islands, moving the animals methodically, not with force but with a calm, reassuring presence that he projected. Just as Alara had taught him during the tornado, he waded into waist-deep, churning water to coax a terrified, arthritic old donkey to safety, his voice a low, steady murmur against the roar of the flood in the midst of the chaos. His wife went into labor at the small local clinic the town's only doctor was struggling to manage the influx of minor injuries from the flood, and Jake was torn between his duty to the foundation and his duty to his family. It was Samuel, now in his late 90s but with a spirit as indomitable as ever, who made the decision for him. "Go," the old man said, placing a frail but firm hand on Jake's shoulder. "Your family needs you. We learned from a Bison a long time ago that a community protects its own. We've got this." Jake arrived at the clinic just in time to welcome his daughter into the world. He named her Alara Rose, in honor of the woman who had saved him and the wild prairie that had become his home when he returned to the foundation the next day. Exhausted, but exhilarated, he found the floodwaters receding and every animal safe. The staff and the townspeople had worked through the night, a seamless ballet of compassionate efficiency. The community Titan had saved had, in turn, saved his legacy. Jake stood on the porch of his small house, holding his newborn daughter, and looking out over the sanctuary, he saw the interconnectedness of it all. The rescued boy, now a father; the condemned Bison, now a legend; the blind girl, now a world-renowned healer. It was all part of the same story, a story of how one act of empathy could ripple outward, touching countless lives and changing the world in ways no one could have ever predicted. He looked down at his daughter, sleeping peacefully in his arms. "You have a lot of incredible stories to learn, little one," he whispered, "but they all start in the same place, with the choice to listen to a heart that's hurting and the courage to answer with your own." The wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying the faint, distant howl of a restored wolf pack, a sound of wildness remembered, of a family made whole again. It was the sound of hope, the enduring music of a world learning to heal itself, one connection at a time.